This channel is actually about showing the, at least from my viewpoint, my humble opinion, the Christian worldview in response to the normal secular worldview that we find in the world today. Being a Christian is supposed to be about a transformative message, not a secular view, not a view that it's not supposed to be what everybody else does. It's supposed to be about being different and having different. Sometimes a Christian will look to the world like we're a liberal, and sometimes like we're a conservative, but a Christian really shouldn't be either one, because they're both part of a world system that was not set up by Jesus Christ or by God. It was set up by man, and that's why it's secular and humanist. In fact, the whole idea of being a conservative or a liberal centers around your view of, believe it or not, evolutionary thought. Everybody talks about Darwin like that's the only theory of evolution that's out there. The truth is, there are competing theories. There's like 3 different theories of evolution. One is Darwin's theory, which is basically could be summed up as survival of the most adaptable. And then there's the conservative view, which is survival of the fittest. And then finally you have the socialist view that says we need to preserve everything, because in order to get to the next level of evolution, we may need whatever it is, whoever that person is, whoever that group is. And really the only enemy that socialism sees are those that oppose socialism. And it's the idea that in socialism, it's the idea of we'll just lock arms, and together we the strong will raise the weak up, and so we will all evolve together. The conservative says, nuts to that, it's survival of the fittest. If you're not strong enough to survive, then you shouldn't survive, you should die out. And then the Darwinian view is kind of in between. It says whoever can adapt the best, well, they're the ones that should survive. If you can adapt, and that's a very pragmatic approach. And we can see it in, they all look at nature and find evidences for what they believe in nature, but the Christian looks and says, we are, regardless of how long God took to do it, regardless of how God did things, at the end of the day, Genesis 1:1 says, in the beginning God created the heavens and the earth. John 1 says, in the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. All things were made by Him, and without Him was not anything made that was made. Of course, that's talking about Jesus Christ. So the Christian worldview says that the earth is the Lord's and the fullness thereof, and it's not about our survival. All of these things socially, it's not about our survival, it's about our stewardship, because ultimately all of this belongs to God, and we have been made stewards of God's creation, and so we judge ourselves based on what kind of stewards are we being. When we have to give account before God, what how will he look at how we have been treating each other? How will he look at how we have been treating his creation? And so as Christians, that's what we're looking at, is a worldview that says this world doesn't belong to us. It doesn't belong to future generations. This world belongs to God, and as such, we have to take care of it because we've been put in charge of taking care of it. That's the whole idea of man being put in the Garden of Eden. Man was put there to dress and keep the garden, and by extension, our belief is that God has put us out here to be ambassadors for him, to take care of each other. Jesus even said that. In fact, the Bible, the entire Bible, can actually be summed up in 2 commandments. The first is, thou shalt love the Lord thy God with all thy soul, with all thy mind, with all thy strength. And then Jesus pointed out the second commandment is along that same line, only it says that we should love our neighbor as ourselves. And actually in the parable of the Good Samaritan, what happened was a lawyer was trying to trip Jesus up because he wanted an out. And so Jesus, he said, well then, who's my neighbor? And, is it the guy that lives next door to me? Is it just my fellow countrymen? Who are my neighbors? And Jesus gave the story of the Good Samaritan. He said, okay, here it is. There's this man, he was traveling, and he fell among thieves who robbed him, took all that he had, beat him, left him for dead on the side of the road. And so here he is laying, and along comes a Levite, and he looks at this bloody mess on the side of the road and passes along the other way. And along came a priest, and he did the same thing. Finally, there comes a Samaritan. Now, to kind of understand the between the Jews and the Samaritans, you would almost you would have to go along the lines of, say, somebody who follows Louis Farrakhan and a white supremacist. That's the degree to which the difference is among these two groups. And the Samaritan, they had nothing to do with each other. In fact, the hatred was so great, there were times that if a Jew was traveling, Samaria fell between Galilee and Judea, on the east side of the Jordan River. And there were Jews that so despised the Samaritans that they would actually cross the Jordan, come down the west side, or no, excuse me, back that up. The west side, you had Galilee, Samaria, Judea. And what would happen is some Judeans and Galileans, to go back and forth between Jerusalem and places like Nazareth, they would cross over and go the east side of the Jordan River so that they could avoid going through Samaria, which added miles. And it's not like driving a car. Most of the time they were walking, and they would have to walk all of that extra distance. But that's how much some hated each other. We find that in the stories of Jesus, there were a lot of times that it said he must needs go through Samaria. And the reason was not a physical reason, but a spiritual reason, so that he could reach the outcast with the gospel. And that's something else about the Christian worldview, is that we are to be inclusive and we are to take the gospel to to anybody. We shouldn't have our churches filled with just pretty in the pew people. We should be endeavoring to reach everyone. And the idea is the gospel transforms us from who we were, aliens to Christ, into believers, into followers of Christ. Anyway, to finish the story, this Samaritan comes along, finds this Jew, battered, bleeding, puts him on his own mule, takes him to the inn, cares for him through the night, and then when it's time the next day for him to leave, tells the innkeeper, take care of this guy, and anything you spend beyond, I'll pay for it when I come back through. I will settle up with you. So out of his money, he took care of this man, and as far as we know, never even identified who he was. He was just a Samaritan passing by who took care of him. Jesus then said, now, who was neighbor to this man? And of course the lawyer says, well, the Samaritan. The point being, it's not about politics. It's not about social agenda. It's about doing the right thing. It's about showing human compassion. And it's about, ultimately, we as Christians have to put Christ first, and we have to reflect Christ. So sometimes to the world, we will identify more with progressives and liberals because we have a different worldview. We have a Christian worldview. But then there are other times that we're going to look and we're going to identify more with conservatives. Now keep in mind, I am not talking about the old political conservative liberal as far as whether we're talking small government, large government. In that regard, you have Christians, good, solid Christians, Bible-believing, sometimes, fundamentalists who are on both sides of that issue. And in fact, in the founding of the country, you find that the vast majority of our founding fathers, regardless of what side of the issue they were on, of big or small government, they predominantly, in fact, over 80% of the founding fathers were either Episcopal / Anglican or Presbyterians, with everything else kind of falling into that 30% or so minority. But for the most part, they were either Anglican, which would become the Episcopal Church here in America, or they were Presbyterians. So we're not talking about that part of it, whether we believe big government or small government. We're talking about socially. And see, because I don't fall into that, because I believe God created the heavens and the earth, and I believe that we have a responsibility to behave in a way that's pleasing to God, I don't fall into this evolutionary philosophy of the rights of man, as we see throughout history, of Marxism and fascism and all that. I don't believe in any of that. I have a Christian worldview that says all men are created equal before God, and we all have an equal responsibility before God to, one, take care of each other, and two, to live the kind of lives that when we stand before the Lord, we're going to be able to hold our head up, that we at least attempted and had the right attitude to do the right thing. So that's why I am not a conservative and I am not a liberal, and I am a Christian, And my worldview, and what you will see on this channel in the coming weeks and months and years,